It was early spring, March 1944, over the skies of Eastern Europe. Soviet pilots stationed near the Ukrainian front were scanning the clouds for enemy aircraft when whispers began circulating about a new American fighter, the P-51 Mustang. Captain Ivan Petrov, a seasoned Red Air Force pilot with over 120 combat missions under his belt, recalled the first time he heard of it. "At first, I thought it was just propaganda," he said in a 1973 interview. Yet, reports filtered through Moscow from Lend-Lease intelligence indicated that this aircraft had a unique combination of speed, range, and agility unlike anything the Soviets had faced before. The Mustang, with its Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, was capable of escorting bombers deep into Germany, striking fear into the Luftwaffe, and potentially, if deployed more broadly, into Soviet operations. How could a plane built in distant America threaten the mightiest air force of the Red Army? Viewers, imagine being a pilot in 1944. Would you have felt fear or curiosity? Subscribe for more videos as we dive into the P-51's journey. On March 14, 1944, Intelligence Officer Major Sergei Ivanov reviewed aerial reconnaissance photographs captured by the Soviets near the Romanian front. The P-51 Mustang appeared in these photos, its sleek fuselage glinting under the sun. "It's fast, too fast," Ivanov muttered, pacing his office in Kiev. The photographs showed the aircraft diving and climbing with unprecedented speed and precision. Compared to the AK-3 and La-5 Soviet frontline fighters, the Mustang represented a new level of technological superiority. Pilots whisper among themselves that the Mustang could outpace and outmaneuver almost any aircraft currently deployed by Axis or Soviet forces. It was not just a plane. It was a symbol of industrial power meeting tactical ingenuity. How do you think you would feel if you saw such a machine for the first time? By April 1944, American Mustangs began accompanying B-17 and B-24 bombers on raids over Germany. Soviet attaches, observing the flights from bases near Lublin, noted how the Mustangs changed the air war's dynamics. Colonel Dmitry Sokolov, who oversaw air operations in western Ukraine, remarked in his journal, "The Americans are building a plane that combines the heart of a lion with the speed of a falcon. If this reaches full operational capacity in Eastern Europe, it will disrupt everything we know about air dominance." Emotion ran high among Soviet officers. Pride for their own aircraft's achievements mingled with a grudging respect for this American innovation. Could a single plane design truly threaten the Soviet air strategy? In late April, intelligence reports indicated the P-51 had superior high-altitude performance. This meant it could intercept German bombers long before they reached Allied territory and could potentially outmaneuver Soviet interceptors if encountered. Major Petrov recounted the tension. "When we first saw footage of the Mustang, we knew that our tactics would need rewriting. It wasn't just speed, it was the way it handled at altitudes where we felt untouchable." This realization sparked fear and fascination simultaneously. Imagine being a Soviet commander knowing the enemy had the ability to strike far deeper than you anticipated. How would that reshape your approach to strategy? The Mustang's long operational range was another source of anxiety. Unlike shorter-range Soviet fighters, the P-51 could escort bombers for over 1,500 miles. This meant it could penetrate deep into enemy territory, support strategic bombing, and potentially impact Eastern Front operations indirectly. Lieutenant Alexei Morozov, who flew reconnaissance over Poland, described the psychological impact. Seeing one Mustang glide effortlessly across enemy lines, knowing it could strike almost anywhere, it was unsettling. For Soviet airmen accustomed to quick dogfights, the Mustang represented a new kind of warfare. How would you adapt if your opponent could strike with such reach? By May 1944, Moscow's military strategists began discussions about how to counter the Mustang. They examined every known specification, every reported sortie, and every captured fragment from downed aircraft. Their fear wasn't just about technical specs. It was about unpredictability. A Soviet intelligence briefing noted, "The Mustang's maneuverability and firepower exceed any aircraft currently encountered. Immediate measures are required to mitigate the tactical advantage it presents." Imagine being in that room. How would you feel knowing your enemy had an aircraft that might outperform all your current assets? The psychological effect of the Mustang cannot be understated. Soviet pilots reported sleepless nights analyzing how to intercept it. Petrov's squadron experimented with high-speed drills and revised engagement tactics. Yet the shadow of the Mustang loomed over every sortie. It wasn't just another plane. It was a challenge to everything we believed about aerial combat. Petrov later reflected, "Viewer question. If you were tasked with countering a plane that seemed unbeatable, where would you start?" Subscribe for more insights into Cold War aviation. On June 6, 1944, D-Day changed the strategic picture. As Allied forces stormed Normandy, the P-51 provided crucial bomber escort, drastically reducing losses. Reports from Soviet liaisons at Allied command posts highlighted how efficiently these aircraft protected bombers, cutting down Luftwaffe interceptions. Soviet observers were both impressed and wary. If America could build planes with such versatility and reliability, what did this imply for future conflicts? The emotion in the corridors of Soviet Air Command ranged from admiration to alarm. Would you feel admiration or fear knowing your ally could dominate an airspace with minimal losses? July 1944 brought the first direct encounters between Soviet units and P-51s during joint Lend-Lease operations. Though officially allies, Soviets had mixed feelings about sharing airspace. Pilot reports noted that while Mustangs rarely engaged Soviet aircraft aggressively, their presence challenged established aerial hierarchies. Captain Petrov described it as like seeing a new species in the sky, beautiful, lethal, and unsettling. How would you react if an ally's technology outclassed yours in front of your own eyes? Soviet engineers began studying captured Mustangs with obsessive attention. They documented engine performance, airframe strength, and maneuverability. Chief designer Alexei Yakovlev, while analyzing the aircraft, noted, "This is a machine designed not merely to fight, but to dominate. We must learn its secrets, for in understanding it lies our survival." Emotion was tightly intertwined with intellectual curiosity and fear. What would you prioritize first if faced with a seemingly unbeatable machine? By August 1944, intelligence indicated that Germany was desperate to replicate the Mustang's advantages. The Luftwaffe had begun testing captured models, acknowledging their inferiority. Soviet command observed these tests carefully, noting that even the enemy struggled to match the Mustang. Colonel Sokolov remarked, "If even our adversaries cannot counter it, we must rethink our entire air doctrine." How would you feel knowing your enemy's engineers are struggling while you're still trying to adapt? Emotion ran particularly high among frontline Soviet pilots when they saw the Mustang perform low-altitude strafing runs over Normandy. Its ability to strike ground targets with precision while evading interception shocked veterans accustomed to conventional air battles. Petrov recounted, "I had never seen anything move like that. Our tactics were almost archaic in comparison." Fear? Yes, but also respect. Viewer engagement. Have you ever witnessed a technology that completely outclassed your expectations? How did it make you feel? September 1944 saw the Mustang's impact ripple across Soviet strategic planning. Military academies in Moscow began incorporating studies of the P-51 into lessons on air superiority. Professors lectured on speed, altitude, and tactical use, emphasizing the importance of adaptability. Soviet pilots were trained to anticipate the Mustang's tactics, fostering both fear and fascination. Imagine being taught in a classroom how to face a plane that outmatches all your familiar fighters. Would you feel empowered or intimidated? By the end of 1944, the Mustang had cemented its reputation as a game changer. Soviet pilots knew that in any future conflict involving the West, American air superiority would hinge on aircraft like the P-51. Captain Petrov, now a decorated veteran, reflected, "We feared it because it was brilliant, not because it was invincible. It forced us to think differently, to evolve." Viewer question. If you were a Soviet strategist, what would your first step be to counter the Mustang? Subscribe for more videos as we continue this thrilling story. October 1944 marked the first time Soviet pilots engaged directly in coordinated operations with American forces, where P-51 Mustangs were actively escorting bombers over enemy territory near the Romanian oil fields. For the Red Air Force, The experience was both enlightening and unnerving. Captain Ivan Petrov, now reassigned to the western sector of Ukraine, recalled the sheer precision of the Mustangs as they swooped down from high altitude to intercept German fighters threatening the bombers. Their timing was impeccable, Petrov remembered in his later memoirs. They were not only faster than our best planes, but they also seemed to anticipate every move the enemy made before we even had a chance to react. This revelation struck fear deep into Soviet commanders, who had prided themselves on superior maneuverability and tactical ingenuity. For the first time, the concept of technological supremacy challenged long-held assumptions about air combat. Observing the Mustangs perform at altitudes and speeds previously thought unattainable by any practical fighter forced the Soviets to reconsider training, tactics, and even aircraft design philosophy. It was no longer simply about numbers or bravery. It was about mastering machines that seemed almost alive in their responsiveness. This moment highlighted an uncomfortable truth. The Mustang represented a leap in aerial warfare technology that even the most experienced Soviet pilots could not ignore. Viewer engagement question. If you were witnessing an aircraft that outperformed your entire fleet, how would it shape your strategies in battle? Subscribe for more videos as we delve deeper into these tense encounters. November 3rd, 1944, brought a chilling encounter over the Carpathian Mountains, where a formation of Soviet Law-5s attempted to intercept a squadron of Mustangs, escorting Allied bombers targeting German supply lines. The high-altitude performance of the Mustang proved devastatingly effective. Lieutenant Alexei Morozov, who led one of the intercepting groups, later described the event in vivid detail. The Mustangs descended like phantoms from the clouds. Each maneuver was precise, controlled, almost surgical. Our planes struggled to keep up. We were outmatched in every aspect. The fear was compounded by the psychological impact of the Mustang's presence. Unlike previous enemies, this was not a clumsy adversary or a predictable Luftwaffe fighter. It was a machine designed with precision and purpose, capable of exploiting every weakness in existing Soviet tactics. Reports noted how Soviet pilots began doubting the effectiveness of traditional formation flying and dogfighting maneuvers that had worked for years. Even the veterans who had faced Stukas, Messerschmitts, and Focke-Wulfs were unnerved. In Moscow, senior strategists convened emergency sessions to analyze intelligence and develop countermeasures, acknowledging for the first time that technological superiority could dictate outcomes as much as sheer numbers. How would you respond if your most trusted tactics suddenly proved ineffective against a single type of aircraft? By mid-November, the Mustang's reputation among Soviet airmen had reached near mythical status. Reports began circulating of Mustangs achieving kill ratios that were previously unimaginable, intercepting bombers hundreds of miles behind enemy lines with minimal losses. Major Sergei Ivanov, responsible for reviewing intelligence across the Eastern Front, recalled a mounting anxiety. We were trained to fear the Luftwaffe, yes, but the Mustang introduced a new kind of apprehension. It wasn't just lethal. It was intelligent in its deployment, as of anticipating every possible maneuver. Engineers and pilots alike pored over reconnaissance images, assessing every detail of the aircraft's design, from its laminar flow wing to the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, which enabled both speed and long-range efficiency. The fear was not unfounded. The Mustang had reshaped strategic planning, forcing Soviet units to alter patrol routes, reposition anti-aircraft defenses, and rethink fighter engagement protocols entirely. Emotionally, the experience left a mix of awe and apprehension, as veteran pilots struggled to reconcile respect for the technology with the immediate threat it posed. Viewer question: would you focus on studying the technology to adapt, or would you rely on experience and instinct? Subscribe to continue the story. Late November 1944 saw the first significant Lend-Lease coordination between Soviet and American air forces. Soviet liaison officers were embedded with American squadrons, observing the Mustang in live combat. Captain Petrov, assigned as a liaison, witnessed firsthand the aircraft's unparalleled maneuverability during a mission over Budapest. The Mustang sliced through enemy formations like a blade, he noted. We had studied its specifications, yet seeing it in action was a revelation. Our own pilots, despite skill and courage, struggled to maintain pace and positioning. This period highlighted the duality of emotion, Respect for Allied capabilities intertwined with the realization that existing Soviet aircraft could no longer dominate the skies unchallenged. Soviet engineers intensified efforts to adapt, including modifications to the Yak-9 and La-7, attempting to close the performance gap. The Mustang's psychological impact extended beyond the cockpit. Ground command feared that failing to match or counter the aircraft could undermine morale, especially as rumors of Mustang ghost squadrons spread. How would you prepare your pilots psychologically for an opponent that seems invincible? December 1944 brought winter conditions to Eastern Europe, complicating air operations but not diminishing the Mustang's effectiveness. Soviet reconnaissance noted that Mustangs adapted seamlessly to low temperatures and high-altitude icing conditions, outperforming older Soviet designs. Lieutenant Morozov described the challenge. Flying in sub-zero temperatures was already perilous, yet the Mustang's ability to maintain agility and speed at altitudes where our planes struggled left us feeling exposed, vulnerable. Every engagement was a test not just of skill, but of nerves. Pilots began conducting mock exercises, studying Mustang attack patterns, and attempting evasive maneuvers. Despite ingenuity, the fear persisted. The Mustang seemed to redefine the parameters of aerial engagement. The broader implication was clear. Any future conflict with American forces would require a complete reevaluation of Soviet air strategy, emphasizing technological parity over sheer numbers. Viewer engagement. If faced with an enemy whose technology outperforms yours, do you adapt, innovate, or retreat? By January 1945, Soviet intelligence compiled extensive performance data on the Mustang, revealing its superior climb rate, speed, and range. Colonel Dmitry Sokolov, reviewing reports from frontline pilots, remarked, "This is no ordinary aircraft. It challenges everything we know about dogfighting, bombing support, and air superiority." Emotions among pilots were a mix of frustration and determination. They had to reconcile years of training with the stark reality of the Mustang's capabilities. Training programs evolved rapidly, incorporating new tactics, formation changes, and altitude adjustments. Engineers began experimenting with modifications to existing aircraft, attempting to exploit perceived Mustang weaknesses. Yet, every adaptation seemed incremental compared to the leap represented by the Mustang. The psychological toll on Soviet pilots was significant, blending awe, fear, and a relentless drive to close the technological gap. Viewer question: how would you prioritize adaptation versus improvisation in high-stakes combat situations? Subscribe for more as we continue exploring the Mustang's influence. February 1945 brought the Mustang into direct engagement with Soviet reconnaissance operations over German territory. Soviet pilots observed that the aircraft's long-range capabilities allowed it to escort bombers deep into enemy airspace, striking at strategic targets while remaining largely untouchable. Captain Petrov's unit encountered Mustangs during one such mission. "It was like observing a predator," he said. "We were accustomed to confronting the Luftwaffe, but the Mustang moved with an efficiency and precision that was terrifying. It taught us humility, forcing us to reconsider every maneuver we had once taken for granted." The experience underscored an essential strategic lesson. Technological innovation could outpace even the most disciplined training, and respect for the opponent's capabilities became as critical as skill in the air. How would you approach confronting a machine that seems almost prescient in its movements? March 1945. With the war in Europe nearing its climax, Soviet pilots began to internalize the Mustang's lessons. The aircraft's versatility, effective at high altitude, agile at low altitude, and capable of precision ground attacks, highlighted the changing nature of aerial warfare. Lieutenant Morozov reflected, "The Mustang was not just a plane, it was a statement about industrial capacity and tactical ingenuity. Our own aircraft, formidable as they were, seemed almost quaint in comparison. Pilots trained relentlessly, simulating Mustang engagements and studying flight patterns meticulously. The combination of fear, admiration, and professional respect created a unique psychological landscape, shaping the mindset of Soviet aviators in the war's final months." Viewer engagement. Would you feel inspired or intimidated facing an adversary whose technology surpasses your own? April 1945 marked a critical turning point when Soviet commanders realized that the Mustang's influence extended beyond direct combat. Its presence had forced German forces to adapt, altering bombing strategies and defensive deployments, which in turn affected Soviet operational planning. Colonel Sokolov observed, "The Mustang reshaped the battlefield before it even engaged us directly. Its existence forced adjustments on all sides, demonstrating that technological superiority could create strategic leverage without firing a shot." Emotionally, this realization sparked both frustration and respect among Soviet officers, who acknowledged that their own designs and doctrines required innovation to remain relevant. How would you leverage indirect influence from a powerful but allied technology in your strategic planning? The psychological impact of the Mustang on Soviet pilots cannot be overstated. Even as the war drew to a close, pilots continued to study its maneuvers, learning to anticipate its speed, climb rate, and attack patterns. Petrov's memoirs described how nightly briefings often centered on Mustang tactics, with officers debating counter-strategies long after sorties had ended. "We feared it," he wrote, "not because it was unbeatable, but because it forced us to confront our own limitations. It demanded that we evolve, and that was frightening." Viewer engagement. How do you respond when forced to confront a challenge that pushes you beyond your comfort zone? Subscribe for the thrilling conclusion in Part 3. May 1945 brought victory in Europe, yet the lessons of the Mustang lingered in the minds of Soviet pilots and strategists. Its performance had set a new benchmark for fighter design, challenging the Red Air Force to reconsider aircraft development priorities in the post-war era. Lieutenant Morozov reflected on the mixed emotions. "We celebrated victory, but there was an undeniable acknowledgement that the Mustang had changed everything. It was not just an aircraft, it was a standard against which all future fighters would be measured." The combination of admiration, fear, and professional humility left a lasting mark on Soviet aviation culture. How would you integrate lessons from an ally's superior technology into your own long-term planning? June 1945. With the war over, engineers dissected captured Mustangs, attempting to replicate aspects of its design. Soviet designers studied the laminar flow wing, fuel-efficient Merlin engine, and advanced control systems. Chief designer Yakovlev remarked, "The Mustang is a challenge to our ingenuity. Understanding it is not optional. It is essential if we wish to maintain relevance in future air combat." The painstaking work highlighted the depth of technological respect and fear that the aircraft had inspired. Viewer question: if you had access to a rival's superior technology, would you copy, innovate, or combine approaches to surpass it? July 1945. Soviet pilots continued training, incorporating Mustang-inspired tactics into mock engagements. Captain Petrov emphasized flexibility, situational awareness, and anticipatory maneuvers, recognizing that these principles had been forced upon them by the Mustang's superiority. "We had to rethink everything," he recalled. Speed alone was no longer enough. Precision, endurance, and adaptability mattered as much. The Mustang taught us that. The emotion of respect mixed with lingering apprehension ensured that the lessons were internalized deeply, influencing Soviet air strategy for decades. Viewer engagement. How would you ensure your team learns from a superior competitor without being discouraged? By the end of Part 2, it was clear that the P-51 Mustang had left an indelible mark on Soviet pilots, engineers, and strategists. Its presence had forced fear, admiration, and adaptation in equal measure. Lieutenant Morozov summarized the consensus. "We did not fear it because it was invincible. We feared it because it forced us to evolve, to challenge ourselves beyond familiar limits." As viewers reflect on this, consider, if technology today advanced faster than your capacity to adapt, would you lead, follow, or retreat? Subscribe now to witness the final, riveting conclusion. August 1945 brought a strange mix of triumph and reflection for Soviet aviators. With the European theater concluded, pilots like Captain Ivan Petrov and Lieutenant Alexei Morozov began reviewing their experiences with the P-51 Mustang, a plane whose shadow had loomed over them for more than a year. Petrov recalled walking along the runway in Kiev, watching a squadron of La-7s taxi past, and thinking about how different things could have been had the Mustang been deployed in large numbers on the Eastern Front. "It wasn't just a plane," he said, voice tinged with both awe and fear. "It was a lesson in industrial and tactical superiority. Every maneuver, every sortie, reminded us that aerial warfare had changed forever. Engineers like Alexei Yakovlev began cataloging every detail they could find, from engine efficiency to aerodynamic innovations, realizing that the Mustang's design would influence Soviet aircraft development for decades. Viewer question: if you encountered technology that outclassed yours, would your first reaction be fear, admiration, or determination to improve? Subscribe for more historical insights and untold stories of Cold War aviation. September 1945, Moscow. Soviet military academies hosted intensive seminars dissecting the Mustang's influence on air combat. Colonel Dmitry Sokolov lectured cadets on the strategic implications of American technological superiority. The Mustang didn't merely shoot down enemy planes. It reshaped the operational landscape, he explained. Students, many of whom would later serve in the post-war Air Force, listened in awe as Sokolov recounted instances where Mustangs had changed the outcome of missions by reaching targets untouched, escorting bombers deep into enemy territory, and forcing both the Luftwaffe and Soviet reconnaissance to adapt. The emotion in the room was palpable, respect mixed with a lingering fear of technological inferiority. For many, this was the first real lesson that victory in future conflict will rely not only on courage or numbers, but also on industrial capacity and innovation. Viewer engagement. How do you think lessons learned from a single aircraft could influence the outcome of an entire war? October 1945 saw engineers at the Moscow Aviation Institute conducting hands-on analysis of captured or Lend-Lease Mustangs. Yakovlev himself supervised disassembly sessions, examining airframes, wings, control surfaces, and engines. The Merlin engine's remarkable combination of power and efficiency fascinated Soviet technicians, who marveled at the precision engineering required for such performance. Petrov, observing these studies, remarked, "It was humbling. Our fighters were fast, but the Mustang's balance of speed, range, and agility was something entirely new. I fear what the next war would look like if we did not innovate." This blend of fear and intellectual curiosity captured the essence of the Mustang's impact. It was a plane that commanded respect, challenged assumptions, and forced adaptation across all levels of Soviet aviation. Viewer question: would you focus on copying technology or developing your own solutions when facing a superior adversary? Subscribe for the final revelations about the Mustang's Cold War legacy. November 1945 brought intense strategic discussions within the Soviet General Staff. Reports from the Eastern Front highlighted how the Mustang's operational flexibility had not only dominated direct engagements, but had also influenced enemy logistics and morale. Colonel Sokolov emphasized the broader strategic impact. Even indirect exposure to superior aircraft can redefine command decisions, resource allocation, and tactical planning. The Mustang has taught us that technological superiority often dictates the battlefield before any shots are fired. Emotion ran high as officers debated what lessons could be integrated into post-war doctrine. Veteran pilots who had flown against the Mustang spoke with respect tinged with anxiety. "We survived," Morozov recalled. "But we knew that in the next conflict, speed, precision, and innovation would matter more than sheer numbers." The Mustang was a warning as much as it was a marvel. Viewer engagement. How can fear of a superior competitor be turned into motivation to innovate? December 1945, Leningrad. Soviet designers began blueprinting aircraft concepts inspired by the Mustang's design, seeking to integrate lessons from its laminar flow wings, long-range fuel efficiency, and precision maneuverability into future jet-powered fighters. Yakovlev mused, "We must respect the Mustang, learn from it, but not merely imitate it. Its true lesson lies in thinking beyond conventional constraints." The psychological legacy of the Mustang was apparent. Pilots and engineers alike had been forced to reconsider not only tactics, but the very philosophy of air combat. Fear and respect became intertwined with creativity, creating a new generation of strategic thinkers and designers. Viewer question: if forced to rethink your entire approach, how would you balance respect for innovation with the need to outperform it? January 1946 saw Soviet military academies publishing their first official post-war analysis of Lend-Lease aircraft, with the Mustang receiving particular attention. Petrov, who had been invited to lecture, emphasized the emotional dimension. "It is not enough to analyze speed and altitude. We must understand the psychological impact of aircraft that outperform our own. Fear sharpens the mind. Admiration inspires innovation." The Mustang did both. Students were captivated, realizing that technology alone could influence outcomes even before engagement. The Mustang had become a symbol, not just of American industrial might, but of the evolving nature of modern aerial warfare. Viewer engagement. How you think fear and respect together can influence learning and innovation in high-pressure fields. February 1946. Cold War tensions were beginning to emerge. Although still allies, Soviet leaders recognized that American technological leaps, exemplified by the Mustang, could translate into geopolitical power. Soviet intelligence officers studied Lend-Lease reports with newfound urgency, questioning whether lessons from Mustang encounters could shape preparedness for potential future conflicts with the West. Petrov reflected on this period. We feared what we had seen in the sky, not merely as pilots, but as citizens aware that technology drives power. The Mustang's shadow stretched far beyond the war itself. Viewer question. How do you prepare for an adversary whose innovations are not just immediate threats, but long-term strategic challenges? Subscribe for more insights into the origins of Cold War aerial strategy. March 1946, research and development accelerated in Moscow and Leningrad. Soviet engineers analyzed every Mustang component, from engine performance curves to wing aerodynamics, striving to integrate similar principles into prototypes for post-war fighters. The task was daunting, as innovation had advanced at a pace far exceeding Soviet expectations. Colonel Sokolov noted, "It is easier to build weapons than to change mindsets." The Mustang forced us to challenge our assumptions, to question conventional design norms, and to anticipate technological leaps before they arrive. This acknowledgement of the psychological impact of a single aircraft highlighted the Mustang's profound influence. It was as much a teacher as it was a fighter. Viewer engagement. If your competitor sets a standard, how do you decide whether to imitate, innovate, or leapfrog them? April 1946. As the world watched the beginnings of nuclear diplomacy and post-war reconstruction, Soviet pilots trained rigorously in simulated Mustang engagements. Exercises focused on maneuvering, speed adaptation, and anticipation of enemy behavior. Petrov emphasized strategic thinking. We had to internalize the Mustang's lessons. It wasn't about fear anymore. It was about understanding, predicting, and innovating. Every sortie was a classroom. Every maneuver a lesson in what the future of aerial combat would demand. The psychological legacy of the Mustang remained a constant influence, shaping doctrines and approaches across the Soviet Air Force. Viewer question. How you transform past experiences with a superior adversary into actionable strategies for the future. May 1946 brought the final debriefings and comprehensive analyses of Mustang encounters, consolidating lessons learned. Reports highlighted the Mustang's speed, range, maneuverability, and adaptability, but also emphasized its strategic and psychological effects. Morozov reflected, "We feared it because it forced us to evolve, but in that fear lay the seeds of our own innovation. Without it, we would have remained trapped in outdated thinking." Viewer engagement. Can confronting a challenge that initially seems insurmountable lead to your greatest breakthroughs? June 1946. Strategic planners incorporated Mustang-inspired insights into emerging jet fighter programs, ensuring that the lessons from the Lend-Lease aircraft would shape the post-war generation of Soviet aviation. Yakovlev and other designers debated which Mustang features to adapt and which to surpass. "We must respect, but never be constrained by imitation," Yakovlev said. "Our goal is to learn, innovate, and exceed." The Mustang had not only changed immediate wartime tactics, but had established a benchmark for the Cold War arms race, influencing both design philosophy and strategic thinking for decades to come. Viewer engagement. How do you set benchmarks in your own work to inspire growth and innovation? July 1946, Petrov, now a decorated officer and mentor to younger pilots, reflected on the Mustang's lasting impact. It was more than an aircraft. It was a teacher, a mirror reflecting our own limitations, and a challenge to overcome them. Fear transformed into respect, respect into learning, and learning into innovation. The psychological transformation instilled by the Mustang underscored the human dimension of technological advancement. The combination of emotion, skill, and intellect defined the future of Soviet aviation. Viewer question. How does confronting a superior rival shape both personal and organizational growth? Subscribe to explore more stories of aviation history and lessons from the past. August 1946. As geopolitical tensions simmered toward the Cold War, the Mustang's influence persisted. Soviet air doctrine now emphasized speed, precision, and adaptability, core principles derived from years of observing the aircraft. Pilot training programs, aircraft design protocols, and tactical strategies all bore the imprint of what Petrov described as the Mustang effect. The aircraft had achieved something rare. It forced an ally and former adversary alike to rethink assumptions about air power, technological potential, and the psychological dimensions of combat. Viewer engagement. How would you harness lessons from a competitor to strengthen your own capabilities without copying them blindly? By the end of 1946, the Mustang's legacy in Soviet minds was complete. It had instilled fear, demanded respect, and catalyzed innovation across every level of aviation, from frontline pilots to engineers. From military strategists to cadets in Moscow, the lessons of the Mustang were ingrained deeply. Petrov's final reflection captures the essence. We feared it, we respected it, and in doing so, we learned to think differently. Its shadows shaped the dawn of the Cold War, not just in aircraft design, but in how we approach the future of conflict itself. Viewer reflection. If confronted with a challenge that transforms your entire worldview, do you resist, adapt, or embrace it? Subscribe now for more historical documentaries and deep dives into aviation history.